There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. The morning my son Daniel was buried was one of those moments. But not for the reason you might think. I had been awake since 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table of the house I had lived in for 34 years, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, listening to the silence that comes after someone you love leaves the world for good. Daniel was 41 years old. A heart attack, they said, sudden, massive, no warning. Except there was warning. I just didn't understand what I was seeing until it was too late. My name is Constance. Most people call me Connie. I'm 68 years old, retired from 30 years of teaching second grade in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have lived alone in the house on Magnolia Street since my husband Gerald passed 8 years ago. The house is nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a screened-in back porch, a garden that Gerald started and I've kept alive out of stubbornness and love. But it's mine, every square foot of it. Gerald and I paid off the mortgage the year Daniel graduated high school. And we celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne and a handshake that felt like the most significant thing we'd ever done. Daniel was our only child, born after 2 miscarriages and more prayers than I can count. He was the kind of boy who brought home stray cats and failing students and people who needed somewhere to belong. He got that from Gerald. The generous heart, the inability to say no to anyone who looked at him with need in their eyes. That's how he met Patricia. She was 34 when they married. Daniel was 38. She had 2 children from a previous relationship, Kylie, who was 12, and Mason, who was 9. And she came into Daniel's life presenting herself as a woman who had been through hard times and was finally ready to build something real. I wanted to love her. I truly did. For Daniel's sake, I opened my home and my heart and tried to make Patricia and those children feel like family. I babysat when she needed time alone. I helped with school pickups and homework and birthday cakes. I showed up the way mothers-in-law are supposed to show up. But Patricia had a way of looking at my house that made me uncomfortable from the very first visit. Not looking at it like a home, looking at it like a calculation. She would walk through the rooms with a slow, appraising eye, the way someone walks through a property they're considering purchasing. She asked questions that didn't quite fit the moment. How long had Gerald and I owned it? Was it fully paid off? Did we have a will? What would happen to the house if something happened to me? I answered politely. I told myself she was just practical. Some people are planners. Some people think about finances the way other people think about weather, constantly and without apology. But then small things started happening. Comments about how the house was too big for one elderly woman living alone. Suggestions that I might be happier in a senior community with people my own age. Mentions of a lovely assisted living facility that had opened on the east side of Raleigh. Had I considered visiting? Just to look around. Just to keep my options open. Daniel always changed the subject when she started down that road. I could see the discomfort in his face. The way he would clear his throat or suddenly remember something he needed to check in the other room. He never directly contradicted her. That was Daniel's weakness. He avoided conflict the way other people avoid bad weather. The marriage lasted 3 years before Daniel's heart gave out. 3 years of watching my son grow quieter and more withdrawn. 3 years of holiday dinners where Patricia managed every conversation and Daniel sat at the head of his own table looking like a guest who hadn't been properly welcomed. 3 years of phone calls with my son that left me with a feeling I couldn't name, something between worry and grief. Even though he was still alive and standing right there on the other end of the line. 6 weeks before he died, Daniel came to see me alone. It was a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. Daniel worked Tuesday mornings. He had managed a mid-size accounting firm for 11 years. And Tuesday was his busiest day. The day he handled client reviews and staff meetings and the endless paperwork that came with running other people's financial lives. But there he was on my front porch at 9:30 in the morning. Still wearing his work clothes. Holding a coffee cup from the drive-thru 2 blocks over. Looking like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. I knew before he said a word that something was wrong. "Mom," he said, sitting down at my kitchen table the way he used to sit as a teenager when something was weighing on him. "I need to tell you some things. And I need you to listen before you react." I sat down across from him. Folded my hands. Waited. What came out over the next 2 hours was something I had feared and half suspected and desperately hoped was wrong. Patricia had been transferring money out of their joint accounts for over a year. Not large amounts that would trigger immediate suspicion. Small ones. Steady ones. Hundreds here, 500 there, always with explanations that seemed reasonable in isolation: groceries, the children's activities, car maintenance, household supplies. But Daniel was an accountant. And accountants notice patterns. When he finally sat down and added it all up, he found that Patricia had quietly moved nearly $47 out of their shared finances over 14 months. The money was sitting in an account he hadn't known existed. In Patricia's name only, at a bank across town. That wasn't all. "She's been talking to a real estate attorney," Daniel said, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup as if he needed the warmth. "I found the emails. Mom, she's been asking questions about how property transfers work. Specifically about inherited property. Specifically about what happens to a house when a surviving spouse has no claim on it." I sat very still. "She's been researching your house," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. He looked ashamed, which broke my heart, because none of this was his fault. He had loved a woman who had been calculating her exit strategy since before the wedding cake was finished. "There's something else," he said, and his voice dropped to the kind of low register that means the worst is still coming. "I think she's been planning to divorce me. Not because she doesn't want to be married. Because she thinks if she times it right after I put her name on some of the assets she's been pushing for, she'll walk away with more than she came in with." He looked up at me. "She suggested last month that we should add her to the deed of your house. Said it would make things simpler for the family. Said you'd want to do that. Said it was what Dad would have wanted." I felt a cold calm settle over me. The kind that comes not from indifference but from absolute clarity. "I never agreed to that," I said, "and I never would." "I know," Daniel said. "I told her no. She didn't take it well." We talked for another hour. About what he was going to do. About the marriage. About the children he had come to love even though they weren't his biologically. About how to protect himself financially and legally from a woman who had been planning this longer than he'd been aware of the plan. He was going to see a lawyer that Friday. He had the documents ready. He had the evidence organized the way only an accountant could organize evidence: clean, dated, irrefutable. He never made it to Friday. The call came Thursday evening. Patricia's voice on the phone. Flat and controlled in a way that told me she had already processed her grief, or whatever she was feeling, before she dialed my number. Daniel had collapsed at the office. They had tried everything. He was gone. I don't remember the next 48 hours very clearly. There are fragments. My neighbor Carol sitting with me in the kitchen. Phone calls to people I needed to tell. The feeling of Gerald's absence pressing down on top of Daniel's like a second weight I wasn't equipped to carry. What I do remember, with complete and terrible clarity, is the morning of the funeral. Patricia arrived at my house 2 hours before the service. She was dressed perfectly, black dress, tasteful jewelry, the children beside her in appropriate dark clothing. She looked composed, organized. Like a woman managing a complicated logistical situation rather than burying her husband. She asked to speak with me privately. We sat in Gerald's old study. The room I had kept exactly as he left it, with his books on the shelves and his reading chair by the window and the framed photo of the three of us at Daniel's college graduation on the desk. Patricia sat down across from me with the posture of someone conducting a business meeting. She folded her hands on her knee. She looked at me with eyes that had very little grief in them and quite a lot of assessment. "Connie," she said, "I know this isn't the right time. But there's never really a right time for difficult conversations. And I think it's better to be honest now rather than let things become awkward later." I said nothing. I just waited. "I've been thinking about practical matters," she continued. "About the house. About what makes sense going forward. You're 68. This place is large and it requires maintenance, and honestly, Connie, I think you'd be so much more comfortable somewhere that has support built in. Somewhere with people around. Community." She reached into her purse. And she pulled out a brochure. Glossy. Full color. A senior living community on the east side of Raleigh. The very one she had mentioned to Daniel. The one with the cheerful photographs of silver-haired people playing cards and tending small container gardens on private patios. And underneath the brochure, a bus ticket. One way. Raleigh to Charlotte, where my sister lived. "I thought you might want to spend some time with Ruth while you figure out your next steps," Patricia said, her voice gentle with a precision that felt rehearsed. "The facility in Charlotte that's near her is supposed to be lovely. I can help you look into it." She set the ticket on Gerald's desk between us, next to the photograph of the three of us at Daniel's graduation, next to the books Gerald had loved and the reading lamp I still turned on every evening out of habit. I looked at that bus ticket for a long moment. I thought about Daniel sitting at my kitchen table 6 weeks ago. His hands wrapped around a coffee cup, telling me everything Patricia had been planning. I thought about the appointment I had kept the very next morning. The one Daniel didn't know about because I hadn't wanted to give him more to carry. The one with my attorney, James Whitfield, who had handled Gerald's estate and who I trusted completely. I thought about the documents James and I had prepared, updated, notarized, filed with the county. I reached into the pocket of my black cardigan, the one I had worn to Gerald's funeral and was wearing again today for Daniel, and I pulled out an envelope. I slid it across the desk. "Open it," I said quietly. Patricia looked at the envelope with the first genuine expression I had seen on her face all morning. Curiosity edged with something else. Caution. She opened it. Inside was a copy of the deed to the house on Magnolia Street. The fully paid, updated, recently filed deed, bearing only one name. Mine. Along with a letter from James Whitfield's office confirming that the property had been placed into a revocable living trust, the Constance Eleanor Webb Family Trust, effective 3 weeks prior. That trust named my sister Ruth and Daniel's college friend Marcus as successor trustees. Patricia was not mentioned anywhere. Not a line. Not a footnote. Not a single syllable. I watched Patricia read the document. Watched her read it again. Watched the color drain from her face as the full meaning of what she was holding settled over her. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice losing its practiced warmth. "This was done 3 weeks ago." "It was," I agreed. "Before Daniel died." "Yes," I said, "before Daniel died. After Daniel told me everything." The silence in Gerald's study was complete. Patricia's hands tightened on the document, and I could see her working through it in real time. Running the calculations the way she always ran calculations. Looking for the angle. The leverage. The place where she still had something to work with. Daniel told you what, exactly? She said, and now her voice was careful the way a person is careful when they're walking across ice. Everything, I said simply. The accounts. The transfers. The emails to the real estate attorney. The plan. She said nothing. He was going to see a lawyer that Friday. I continued, my voice steady in a way I was quietly proud of. He had everything documented, organized the way only Daniel could organize things. He came to me first because he needed someone to know the truth before he took the next step. Patricia set the deed on the desk very carefully. Like it was fragile. Like she was trying to figure out if she could still find a way to claim it somehow. You can't prove any of that, she said quietly. I don't need to prove it in this room, I replied. James Whitfield has copies of everything Daniel shared with me. The account statements. The transfers. The email correspondence. He's already been in contact with a forensic accountant. She looked up at me. The house is mine, Patricia. It was always mine. And now it's protected in a way that means it will remain mine. And eventually pass to people who actually loved this family. You will not be living here. You will not be selling it. You will not be benefiting from it in any way. I picked up the bus ticket she had placed on the desk between us. Held it for a moment. Then set it back down in front of her. Thank you for the thought, I said, but I won't be needing this. I'm going to bury my son today. And then I'm going to come home to the house that Gerald and I built. And I'm going to grieve in my own garden. In my own time. At my own pace. I stood up. If I were you, I added, I would use that ticket yourself. Because James is going to be filing paperwork on Monday morning. And the next conversation you'll be having won't be with me. Patricia left my house that morning before the funeral cars arrived. She sent the children to the service with her mother. A quiet woman named Darlene who had always seemed vaguely embarrassed by her daughter. Kylie and Mason sat in the front pew beside me. And I held their hands through the entire service because they had loved Daniel genuinely and they had done nothing wrong. Whatever their mother was, they were just children who had lost a stepfather who cared for them. I would always make sure they knew that Daniel had loved them. The weeks that followed were hard in the way that grief is always hard. But they were also clarifying. Like a long storm that finally passes and leaves the air clean. James filed the paperwork on Monday as promised. The forensic accountant he had retained confirmed Daniel's findings about the account transfers, and then found 3 additional accounts Patricia had opened that Daniel hadn't even known to look for. The total came to just over $61. Patricia hired an attorney. Of course she did. She contested Daniel's estate, claimed she was entitled to a larger share of their marital assets. Filed a motion challenging the timing of my trust. Every legal maneuver available to someone who had planned for this possibility and was now discovering the plan had a significant flaw. The flaw was Daniel's meticulous documentation. And James Whitfield's 30 years of experience. And the fact that the trust had been established before Daniel's death. Before there was any estate to contest. Before Patricia had any legal standing to challenge anything related to this house. Her attorney advised her to settle. She didn't listen at first. She rarely listened to anyone who told her something she didn't want to hear. But 3 months into the proceedings, when the full scope of the financial evidence became clear in discovery, she changed her mind. The settlement was modest. She kept the money in the accounts she had opened because proving criminal intent in civil cases is complicated and expensive. And James advised me that pursuing it further wasn't worth what it would cost in time and emotional energy. But she received nothing from Daniel's estate beyond what the law minimally required. Nothing from my house. Nothing from the investments Daniel had been quietly building for years. She moved to Charlotte eventually. which struck me as a particular kind of irony. The city she had tried to send me to became the city she ended up in instead. I stayed on Magnolia Street. In the months after the settlement, I did something I had been putting off for years. I replanted Gerald's garden, not just maintaining what he had started, but actually expanding it. New beds along the back fence, a small fountain that catches the morning light, a bench where I sit most evenings with a book and a glass of sweet tea, and the particular peace that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. Marcus, Daniel's college friend and my co-trustee, comes by most Sunday afternoons. He was Daniel's best friend for 20 years, and sitting with him on the back porch feels like keeping a small piece of Daniel present in the house. He tells me stories about Daniel in college that make me laugh and cry in equal measure. And I tell him stories about Daniel as a little boy, and somehow between us we manage to hold on to all the pieces. Kylie called me on Daniel's birthday, 6 months after the funeral. She was 15 by then, and her voice was careful and uncertain on the phone, as if she wasn't sure whether she still had the right to call me grandmother, which was what Daniel had asked her to call me when they first married. "You can always call me," I told her. "That doesn't change. None of what happened between the adults changes what you meant to Daniel or what you mean to me." She cried a little. I cried a little more. And we made a plan for her to come visit during her school break, to help me in the garden the way Daniel used to help Gerald when he was small. I think about that morning in Gerald's study sometimes. About the bus ticket sitting on the desk between us and the look on Patricia's face when she read the deed. She had spent 3 years calculating, maneuvering, waiting for the moment she could slide me out the door and claim what she had decided was rightfully hers. And she had made one fundamental miscalculation. She assumed that a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher who smiled at dinner parties and kept quiet at holiday gatherings and never made waves was someone who could be pushed without pushing back. She never stopped to consider that 30 years of teaching second grade prepares you for exactly one thing above all else: patience. And the ability to see a problem coming long before it arrives at your door. I still wear Gerald's old cardigan on cold evenings. I still turn on his reading lamp even when I'm sitting on the back porch instead of in his chair. I still talk to him sometimes, quietly, the way you talk to someone you loved for 40 years and haven't quite figured out how to stop loving just because they're gone. I tell him about Daniel, about the garden, about Kylie and her visits and the way she has Daniel's laugh, which I didn't expect and which catches me off guard every time. And sometimes I tell him about the look on Patricia's face when she read that deed, about the bus ticket sitting on the desk between us, about the exact moment she understood that the house on Magnolia Street had never been part of her plan. I think Gerald would have found that particular chapter satisfying. I know I do. And that was just the beginning. Because what happened next? 3 weeks after the settlement, I never saw coming. Subscribe, so you don't miss what comes next.